Alright, YouTube people, this is a 2006 Can-Am or Bombardier Rally. Pretty much the same from, I think, 03 up to 06 or 08, something like that. It's a 200cc single-cylinder motor. Right now, ours won't start, so when you hear this sound, little click noise, that's the solenoid. You can take your voltage meter, and on top of the starter motor, there's a little bolt. You go up on there, and you check for voltage to see if the voltage is getting to your starter motor when you hit the button. Ours is. And we took the side cover off here for the belt housing. All these bolts are the same size. They all come out. They're like 8mm. When you take that off, you can see the flywheel here for the motor. And this one, you can spin it by hand. Spins freely. I have the spark plug out so I can do that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the airbox. There's 2 bolts underneath, a couple of clamps. We're going to take the airbox out to get the starter motor out. Alright, so you're going to take these side covers off. And when you do that, sometimes it's best just to put these screws back in the places where you got them from. They'll go right back in here. And this way you'll know where they go when you're trying to put it back together again. Same thing over here with the seat bolts. You put the seat bolts back in. Ours only has the rear seat bolts because we've had it apart so many times. Now we're trying to get this air box out of here, so we took off this piece of rubber that goes between the carburetor and the air intake, and you just pry that out. You loosen up this screw here, and then you pry this out of the air box with a screwdriver, trying not to puncture it, but that's the only way to get it off. Alright, so we took off the right side cover, just a piece of plastic down by the shifter here. 2 screws took that out and put them back in the side of the air box. This is the air box. Basically there was I showed you the piece before, the rubber piece that held the carburetor to this side. On this side there's another hose clamp over here for the intake from up here by your air cleaner. Pull this off and show you. That's the air cleaner up here. So the air comes in there, comes through this air box. So this has to come off to get to the starter motor. And there's 3 screws, 1, 2, and 3. Alright. Before you start removing the starter, the most important thing is to remove the negative terminal off of your battery, because you don't want to spark anything out when you're taking out the starter motor. So that comes off. Right, put that down there. And if you come down here, you can see we have 2 Allen bolts on the back side, and we have 2 wires. The negative, which is on this Allen bolt, that comes out, and then over here we have the positive, which we're going to take out. That's why it's so important to remove the battery from the machine. Take the negative off so you don't spark when you're trying to take this off. Alright guys, say what you will about Can-Am, but this is the starter motor and it's out, and it wasn't that complicated. If you look up inside here, there's the hole for where the starter motor goes into, and it has an O-ring that seats it. And then if you come back over here, we have 2 bolts. They were Allen bolts that go in here, and they're not too tight. And when you put them back in, don't make them too tight because it only threads into this aluminum. So it would be horrible to go out to Can-Am and spend $250 on this starter motor without testing it to make sure that that's what's really wrong. So I got a little piece of wire here, and I hooked it to the positive terminal of the starter motor, and the negative terminal of the starter motor is actually the chassis here of the motor itself. So just straight down to your battery, land the chassis on the negative post, wiggle it on there, get it good, and then just touch this to the positive side. And as you can see, our motor's not turning, so it's bad. We're going to try to open it up and repair it. Alright guys, this is your starter motor in pieces. These bolts, there's 2 of them. They go up through the middle and they come all the way through. You take these out, and then you start to pull this apart. This side, there's a nice needle bearing on the inside. You can see when you put this back together again, you have to make sure you give that adequate grease application. This is the armature, and this armature, it looks like it's in good shape. There's no signs of burnt wires or anything on this. It looks pretty good. This is where the brushes ride on here. You're going to clean this up to make it a little more shiny, but we don't want to rub too much. We don't want to take too much off. Alright, so we'll just clean that with a little piece of maybe some Scotch-Brite or some emery cloth or something like that. This is the magnet. We're gonna clean this out. There's a lot of dirt and debris inside here. And these are the brushes. You can see there's a bunch of springs behind the 4 brushes of this motor. I haven't found any immediate sign as to why this has stopped working. So I think we're going to clean it out, get our springs back in line, and put it back together. So we have the armature over here in our parts washer, and we're going to take, this is a brass brush, which is soft. You don't want to use steel or anything like that. And we're just going to brush the armature, and as you can see, it gets pretty clean pretty quick. You don't want to use anything too coarse on this because you'll just wear it out. It's made out of soft metal. All right. So when you clean out the rest of the stuff, you can either use your wife's or your sister's toothbrush. It works best. And just make sure you get it nice and clean. Get all the carbon buildup out of the magnets and stuff. You don't want any foreign particles jamming up your starter motor when you get it back together again. So it's just a nice thorough scrubbing with this nice soft bristle toothbrush. Works great. Alright, so with all the brushes in here and the bushing down there, we're just going to dip this in the parts washer and clean it all out and get the grime out. Okay, so we have this starter motor completely disassembled. There were 2 screws here that held this plastic brush holder in place. We took them out with those brushes. And we started to take this apart because we realized we were doing a continuity check. And you see my continuity meter here, as I hold my 2 wires together, the numbers jump, see? Nice and easy, nothing scientific, just making a connection. But when you went from the positive post here to one of our brushes, we get nothing. So that's not good. That's why our motor's not working. And when I realized down here, if you look closely, which I'm going to aim this right at the camera for you, there's this solder joint right here. And it touches these 2 prongs right here, 1 and 2. Now these prongs, if you look, are not attached anymore. The solder joint broke. It's very difficult to see it on this camera, but if you look closely when you're doing it, you will see that they move apart from each other. And I'm doing this looking at the camera. Here you go. You can see it's moving apart. So that's all that's wrong with this motor. So we are going to hit the workbench, try to solder these back on to this lug, and check continuity and put it back together. All right, so we're soldering this lug back onto the tab. There's a circle or ring underneath here that connects all 4 brushes to one piece of metal, and that's for the positive terminal. So when you solder this back onto these 2 fork lugs, you want to heat that lug, not this ball of solder they have up here, because you want to heat where you want the solder to go to. So you really have to get your soldering iron in, and the solder will flow best, the heat will transfer best when there's solder flowing to it when it's wet. So we're just going to let it go wet a little bit, and when we see it going onto the fork, we know we've got good connection here, which I am not getting. Okay, there you go. You see the fork is getting hot, and the solder is starting to flow in the right direction. All right, I think that's good. All right, so we knew that was the bad part, and we knew that it wasn't soldered properly. So we resoldered it, but it's always good to check your work before you reassemble. So put the one lug on this on the lug there, and we're going to touch one of the brushes now, which isn't touching the chassis, and you can see that we have continuity on the meter. It works just fine, and that's why our motor wasn't working, and now it will work. Okay, so getting the armature back in with these 4 brushes was very painful. You know, we greased the end of the armature and the bushing inside, and then we slid each brush in one at a time, holding it back by the brush wire with a pair of pliers, which took 3 of us and all of our hands to hold each one back, and then we slid the armature in. It was amazing that it actually worked on a first try like that. So when you assemble this starter motor again, you see this little dimple right here? There's a tiny little dimple there. And if you look, there's a little piece tack welded to that. And when you pull this up, you can see that it has to go in that little groove right there. So that has to line up with the groove as it goes together. If not, your timing of your motor would be off on here and it wouldn't work. Alright, so we have our little piece of test wire here. We're going to take the frame of the motor, negative battery terminal, and we're just going to tap this to make it spin. Woo! That grabbed tight. That draws a lot of current. And you can see that even arced the top. So, good thing I yanked it off. But it works pretty good. I'm happy. So, grease your O-ring, grease the gear before you slide it back in. Don't forget to hook your negative terminal up over here to the chassis with the Allen bolts. And then you hook your positive terminal back up. And you're ready to put the airbox in after that. Alright, so while you have this apart, our carburetor choke isn't working that well. So we're going to make sure that it's cleaned up in here. We're going to just take the float bowl off like this and make sure that the ports are clean and stuff like that. Okay, we're going to reassemble and we're going to put the airbox on. And just thinking now, I want to put this piece for the carburetor back in here now. This piece is very hard to get in when it's on the machine. So we're going to quickly assemble that and we'll be right back. Okay, now that we got this piece back on for the carburetor, we're going to slip this underneath. We'll bolt our 3 bolts in and we'll reattach this to the air intake from the air filter up top here. So when you slide the airbox in, you want to hook it right up to the carburetor here. Get it lined up nice, good pressure on it, tighten up the clamp. I situate my clamp so that the screws are on top. When you have screws at the bottom, like if you had it down here, every time the water was dripping off of here, when you get it wet, it would end up rusting out the screw. So it's best to keep them at the top. Alright guys, so we're going to put this side cover back on, and I just wanted to mention one thing that's important. This is a bearing in it, which supports this part of the clutch. You don't want to try to start this or anything without this cover on, because if it spins not inside here, I can't imagine good things will happen.